announcements. Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining this morning. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you are a faculty member or research assistant, research scientist, please nominate yourself or anyone that you think would be a great council member for the NAC Council. We are looking for 2 people in upcoming elections, and so the nominations close today. And
yeah, so today is the last
today is the last day to enter your name to be,
but it doesn't take
all
much.
of this fun. So yes, so please send me a message if you want. I can drop the link in the chat if anyone's interested in nominating themselves. We'll be having a mentoring meet and greet coming up probably in early to mid-December. So please keep your eyes out for that and be sure to join. It's a nice way. We'll just put everyone in breakout groups and kind of mix it up, and everyone can have conversations and meet with some senior folks, junior folks. So it's a nice way to expand your network. We will be having a webinar with our SNRN ISEE NAC abstract winner, who will be announced shortly. So please stay tuned. We're really excited about this. We've been doing this for, I think, 2 years in a row, 3 years in a row. And so it's a really nice way to honor our trainees and junior folks. So also stay tuned. That will probably be in late November. And also, lastly, there is an environmental epidemiology course that's coming up. This will be a great intro to environmental epi. It begins in early November, and I can also pop that information into the chat as well if anyone is interested. So, and yes, we are recording this, so we will post this as soon as the recording is up onto our YouTube channel. As part of the, I think ISEE Global maintains that for us. So happy to circulate that info as well. All right. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We have this really exciting panel. This is going to be the first in our 2-part series of non-academic career opportunities. This one focusing on non-governmental positions primarily. So you'll hear briefly from each of the 3 panelists. I'll introduce them, and then they can give us a short intro into sort of what their lives are like, how they got into what they're doing, and what their typical days look like, so forth. So to get started, I'll introduce each of the 3 panelists, and then I'll turn it over to them, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we have Serena Eftim. She's a senior manager at ICF. She is an epidemiologist and biostatistician and specializes in human health risk assessments for federal agencies and other clients. She's worked to evaluate epi studies for EPA IRIS and NCP monographs. She holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins and also is an adjunct professor at George Washington. Anna Porter is an epidemiologist with expertise in behavioral science and environmental health. She has worked as a consultant at Ramboll and was an assistant professor at University of Southern Mississippi. She has a PhD in public health with a focus in epidemiology from UT Houston. And last but not least, Dan Kraus is a health geographer at HEI and environmental epidemiologist with background in exposure assessment. He contributes to research oversight and review for HEI's core program, including reviewing applications, managing ongoing funded studies, reviewing completed reports, and he'll tell you more about his day-to-day. He holds a PhD in health geography from McGill. And after earning his PhD, he spent 5 years as an epidemiologist with Health Canada. And prior to joining HEI, he was a research associate at University of New Brunswick. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our panelists. I'm not sure if any of you have slides that you'd like to share, but just we'll make it available if you want to share anything. But should we start with Serena?
Sure. Can you hear me? What would you like to know? First of all, I'm a director of epidemiology now I was a manager, a senior manager for a long time, but as one does, one gets promoted. um, um, so I think do you want to prompt me a little bit?
Yeah, so if you could just tell us a little bit about, I gave a really short introduction, but if you want to just talk a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are
Yeah,
now, and sort of what your typical day might look like or a typical week.
sounds good. So right now I'm at ICF International. It's a big consulting firm, and we have a pretty good practice of that I lead the EPI part on, where we do a lot of support for EPA and other federal agencies, in supporting various assessments. And so we do a lot of that kind of research. How I got here, and I've been with ICF for 13 years. So clearly I love it. I actually do love my job. I'll tell you more about that later. Um, so I got here. I have a bachelor's of sciences in mathematics and computer sciences. And in my last year of college, I discovered measure theory. Go figure. And I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. So I wanted to go get the master's in statistics, applied statistics. So I did that. Um, I'm originally from Romania, in case you're wondering, the accent. So this was in Romania, and the applied statistics masters and optimizations too, and operations research, because I thought I want to be an actuary. And then I discovered, I don't. I loved it. I loved the mathematical part of statistics, but I realized I wanted to be more applied. So after my master's, I came to the US teaching mathematics at Marlborough College in Vermont, a very small liberal arts college. I loved it. And while I was there, I was applying to PhD programs because I thought one of my professors, I said, I want to do more applied stuff, but kind of not, I don't want to be an actuary. And they were like, well, how about biostatistics? It's like, and I was like, ooh, what is that? So I got into biostatistics, which I loved, um, which is basically applying statistics. And I think some of us know, but for those who don't, it's, apply statistics in biomedical sciences. And I got into that. And then I was in a project where I was on a project for one of my advisors who was looking into analyzing the health effects of air pollution in the Medicare population. And I was like, oh, this is the coolest stuff. And in this project, we were teamed up with people from environmental health sciences, epidemiologists, and I was like, oh, this is great. Forget about biostatistics. I want to do environmental health. So I jumped. Um, I didn't finish my PhD in biostatistics. I finished it in environmental health sciences and epidemiology. So, and then I did a postdoc because I wanted to learn more. I didn't want to leave school because school was great. I was at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health in Baltimore. I loved my years in school, in grad school. And then I got a research position at the University of Maryland. And while I was writing in my basement a grant in a snowy January or February, and I was struggling with my budget, and it was a tough time. There were hiring freezes, and it was tough to get funding. I found a job ad for this ICF position, and it really felt. I sent it to my advisor, and she said that they write it for you. Like literally, it's like this is exactly who I am. They wanted an epidemiologist and a biostatistician and environmental health and air pollution. And literally, it was like they wrote it for me. And that was it. And that's how I ended up at ICF. And I was I was the first epidemiologist in my practice. And now we have about 10. We have a lot of toxicologists, but I grew the team of epidemiologists really wonderfully. We're really, I think we're doing great work, and our clients at TPA appreciate our help in getting, these health assessment done. And yeah, I'll stop here so I give other people a chance to talk. But that was my journey. Yes.
Thank you, Serena. Anna, maybe we can hear a little bit about your journey, and we'll hear from all three of you, just so that everybody knows the background of how you got there. And then we'll see also as we'll be monitoring the Q&A. So as you guys have questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and we'll get to them. And if not, Sheree and I also have plenty of questions to further investigate sort of your career trajectories. So Anna.
Yeah, hi. So as was mentioned in my intro bio, I up until recently was working as a consultant at a company called Ramball doing environmental epidemiology. I left that job to take a new job at the end of September. But unfortunately that new job didn't work out. So that's one maybe a lessons learned for later in the talk about some of the differences between academia and the corporate world or outside of academia. So anyway, currently I'm not really employed. But as to my background, I got my PhD in epidemiology, or with a focus in epidemiology, graduated in 2017, and then I did a one-year postdoc at UNC. And then from there, I sort of went the traditional route of getting a position as an assistant professor at a university that it wasn't, or it is an R1 university, so they have a substantial amount of funding, but that wasn't because of public health. It was because of polymer science. So it was a very different environment from what I was used to in the PhD program, or I had also worked in research at some big hitter universities. So the assistant professor position was a teaching position primarily, and it was difficult in that environment to get research funding for health-related things. There just wasn't support there. So yeah, eventually I realized that I wanted to do research and I wasn't going to be successful where I was. So I started looking outside of academia, and I got the position at Ramball. And there it was in environmental epidemiology. I had training more in behavioral science, so it was a totally different experience for me, but I got great training from my boss, who was also a great mentor. And then, yeah, after 2 years, I wanted to go back to what I felt like was more where my training lied, in the behavioral epidemiology, physical activity world. But as I said, that didn't end up working out. So, but as far as what my day-to-day looked like, I'll just speak to my Ramball experience. It was a small team. It was basically just myself and my boss, and day to day we had projects that we were actively working on, and I would just have a meeting with him every morning where we discussed what we had done, what needed to be done, or where we were at with things, and then I just sort of got on with it. But that position we were focused on producing research and publishing journal articles about our work. So in terms of the work that I was doing, it was typical research, doing analyses, writing papers. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Anna. How about you, Dan?
Sure. Just hearing different people's stories. I think it's gonna be really, everybody's got very different experiences. I don't know what were kind of generalizable experiences or messages will come from this, but in any case, so yeah, as was said in the introduction, I did my PhD at McGill in Montreal in health geography and environmental epidemiology, and then I got a postdoc at Health Canada, which is the national health agency, and that ended up becoming like a 5-year stay. They were able to hire me afterwards for a year, and then another year, and another year, and I was very happy there, and I was actively working as a scientist, but they were really only able to offer me 1-year contracts, and I was looking for something more permanent. So after about 5 years, I took a faculty position at the University of New Brunswick, which is in Eastern Canada, and I was there for about 5 years, and really we weren't really very happy there in this living there. I'm not from there, and I wasn't really too happy in the department where I was, so I started looking for other opportunities, and at that point, I mean, when I'd been a PhD student, I was sort of fully expecting to be a prof, and so when I was again on the market, I was looking at academic positions, but I was pretty open, and there was an opening at HEI, and I applied, and it was kind of I guess I was kind of a perfect fit at that time. For people who aren't too familiar with HEI, Health Effects Institute, it's a fairly small research institute, about 25 to 30 people. It's based in Boston, and what we do is producing research, so we're not actually actively conducting the research ourselves. We fund people to conduct the research, and then so part of my day-to-day work is kind of managing some of these projects that are being undertaken by other people. A lot of my day-to-day is involved with knowledge translation and science communication. So when basically writing commentaries and accessible summaries of existing studies or studies that have finished, and so trying to put the findings from other people's studies into context, and what did we learn from this, and writing them in a language that's a bit maybe more accessible for the EPA or policymakers or the media. And another kind of part of my day-to-day activities is often it's a bit like a journal editor, in that we're often looking for external reviewers to review applications and to review final reports. So I'm always on the lookout for people that have like just the right expertise, or with a given health outcome or statistical approach, or working with a given data set to review our studies. And so yeah, that's a little bit of background about how I got to where I am and the kinds of stuff that I'm doing. And I like it. I'm very happy there as well. I love my job as well.
That's great. Thank you all. So now that you all know a little bit about sort of everyone's background, I'd love for people to put in the Q&A their questions for the panelists. Maybe I can start off with one. I guess, you've all made the transition from an academic environment to, these various industry positions. And I'm curious what you would say was the most, say, difficult or surprising thing about switching from an academic environment to where you are currently.
I can start. I remember when I was interviewing, I was terrified because I didn't know how to be a consultant. All I knew was academia. And I remember telling them, I said, I just need you guys to train me how to be a consultant. I don't know what that means. I know how to talk to researchers and how to be an academic. And they're like, yeah, you're going to have a mentor, and you have a buddy, and you basically learn from your colleagues. And at least to me, and I can talk to that too, probably. To me, it came very naturally. And I think that's one of the things that translate from academia to at least a consulting environment, where you do a a little bit of research, just like you used to do in grad school or in an academic environment, but you're also part of teams, depending on how big your department is, bigger teams or smaller teams. You know, so you're also like a team lead. You manage your team, you're leading your project lead, right? You're now, you know, you're not part of the lab, you are running the lab. And people really, in my experience, people were really, you are the expert. You're the epidemiologist. When we have questions or when our clients have questions, you are the expert, you know, and it feels so empowering. Not that you don't feel that in academia, but you know, it feels empowering, and also you have a huge responsibility, and hopefully you don't mess up, you know, and you really try to cover all your bases. And it helps when the project is really up your alley and up your expertise, you know. But then you get to learn so much when it's not exactly your expertise from your PhD, right? So it's yeah, but yeah, that you know, it can be terrifying, right? Because you're like, I don't know anything about it. But if you ask for it, people will help you out and will train you. And just like everywhere, just like in academia, you have a mentor who might or might not be your boss. But, you know, it's people love to help other people. So I hope that answered some of your.
Yeah, definitely. Dan or Anna, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I could add two things. One that was, yeah, I don't know. Now that I'm starting talking about how totally relevant this is, but when I came in, when I was hired by HEI, I was already sort of mid-career and had these experiences, and so they were hopeful that I could come in and be a bit of a mentor to some of the more junior staff, and that was something that appealed to me. But then when I arrived at HEI, very similar to what Serena was saying, is that I didn't know any of their policies and I didn't know how a lot of this stuff worked, and I felt a little bit frustrated my first year in that I'm not able to be a mentor. I need people to mentor me and show me the ropes. So anyway, that was a bit of about my transition, but that's not necessarily, anyway, that's a separate point. But what I was going to say, for me, what I have found to be the biggest difference from when I was an academic to my current position, and that I think is probably fairly common, is that when I was an academic and as a PhD student, I felt like I think there was a lot more emotional highs and lows, and you know, there can be a lot of stress and a lot of disappointment if a paper doesn't get published or you don't get a grant. And then there's also a lot of really great excitement when a paper does get published in a big journal, or you get invited to give an invited talk, or the media takes an interest. And so I feel like there were a lot of times when it was like really exciting, amazing things were happening, and then other times when when it not just I was down, but more like this is a hard time where I've got a lot of deadlines and a lot of hard stuff happening. Whereas I feel like right now, it's very level. I don't really there's nothing that is as stressful as, or requires as much of a time crunch or as much pressure as when I was a grad student. But there aren't really super exciting moments since I'm not, actively publishing my own studies anymore. I don't get those extreme highs. So it's a little more mellow, which it has been an adjustment. I think it's positive, and both are, both can be enjoyable lifestyles. But anyway, that's just that's a key difference for me, I'd say, between an academic job and a non-academic job in my experience. I don't know if others agree or feel that way.
I'll say for me, since I still was publishing research. I mean, there was definitely the grant aspect of it is in academia was the most stressful part for me, because you're looking to build your livelihood, and and if you don't get the funding, then it can be really upsetting. So that for me was much more stressful, the funding part of it, than the publishing part of it. But I would say the hardest part for me transitioning from academia to consulting was the loss of my own scientific research goals. So I had my own interests that I had been pursuing in academia, and I had a lot of freedom. There wasn't anybody looking over my shoulder saying whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. It was, is it ethical? And that's kind of the end of the conversation. Everything else is just up to myself or the team that I'm with. And there wasn't a lot of oversight or direction in that sort of way. But then moving to consulting, I was working on what the client wanted. So I didn't have that individual freedom to pursue my scientific interests. And it was sort of similar with the very brief position I had. There was a little bit more freedom for me to pursue my interests, but there was a lot of regulation, unexpected regulation from the rest of the team as to what they did and didn't want. So yeah, for me, that was the hardest transition point.
So we do have, thank you all three of you for weighing in. We do have some questions that have come in now to the Q&A. So I think we'll start going through some of those. The first question is from a PhD student or candidate in environmental epi, who is particularly interested in looking at consulting jobs. And so specific to consulting jobs, the question is, do you mainly do research? How is it different from working in academia, which you may have touched on a little bit already? And who are your typical clients? Like, could you potentially give an example?
I can take this. Since I'm in consulting, I'm happy you're interested. It's I felt I didn't know anything about consulting when I was doing my PhD. So although I remember we had some people from Booz Allen come and give a talk, but they didn't seem very happy. I don't know why they were at Hopkins giving a talk when they clearly were not happy in their job. So I was like, this is not something that I'm interested in. So consulting went out the window, right? But nowadays I see many more people interested while doing their PhDs, aware at least of the industry, which I was not very much aware of while I was doing my PhD. I was just very much an academic. So to your question, yes, we do research. It depends, right? It depends on which clients. So everything is, we still write some sort of grant applications. We get our fundings by basically bidding on proposals from, in my case, federal agencies, right? So EPA, NTP, NIHS, CDC. They need help with certain projects, like big assessments of the health effects of a certain chemical, right? Right now in the news, PFOA, are really big. So this is one of my projects. We're helping EPA Office of Water draft criteria, minimum contaminant levels for PFOA and PFAS, right? Which involves reviewing the entire body of scientific evidence, human, mechanistic, animal, creating these wonderful reports, right, documents that at the end of the day are gonna, at the end of the process, we identify studies that we use for point of departure, derivation, and then we develop an RFD, reference dose, right? And then EPA proposes a maximum contaminant level that's gonna become regulation, right? So it's a lot of pressure to do the best science we can. We follow certain processes. We follow if people are aware of the EPA's IRIS process, which, it's basically a way to conduct systematic literature reviews and assessments, every study goes through, study quality assessment. We evaluate risk of bias assessment. We do risk of bias evaluation for these studies. So that's where your epi chops come into play. And then we also do some data analysis modeling to do those response modeling. We do sometimes meta-analysis. So we do research in that way. In my company, we don't do we don't go out and design an epi study and interview people and collect the data that way. We're doing a combination of what Dan was saying. We use secondary, we use peer publication already published, but we still kind of create our own, so you can still publish. So obviously your name is going to be, or your company's name is on these reports, these assessments, but some clients are also former academics like us, so they're very interested in publishing. EPA is much more open now to publishing, to showing that their science ends up is in peer-reviewed publications, right? So people can actually see what they did, what we did. So you do publish. You respond to comments. So it's a combination, right? It's a combination of the kind of research that you're doing in school, in grad school, and then what you need to create for the client, how you need to support the client. Sometimes you give talks, sometimes you present at meetings, so it's at least in my experience, you can kind of create a big kind of expert area of expertise, and you can get involved in societies and meetings and all that. So you can kind of still keep your academic interest. To what Anna was saying, you have and don't have much control on what project you work on. At some point, especially at the beginning, right? At the beginning, you join, you could just put on whatever. And then at some point, I have to manage multiple projects, right? I can only get deep into so much, or I can choose which one I want to get deep into. And I can choose, I do want to do this meta-analysis, but I don't want to do, I don't want to do data extraction for 50 studies, because I have people who can do that much better than me. Maybe I can do quality control. That's another thing that I found was a big shift for me coming from academia, how much emphasis at least at ICF, we put on quality control. Like the products, even a memo to the client or slides for the Thursday meetings have to be perfect. It's such like in academia, I feel like we were like, it's okay, right? Here we're just everything has to be, sometimes it's the clients request that, they want that, but it's also kind of a company policy, and everything has to look polished and be polished, and I really love that actually. So
Thanks, Sarita.
I gave you an idea of projects and kind of the day-to-day life, and yeah.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple more questions that have come in. There's one in particular for Dr. Krause. And so specific to HEI, when working in knowledge translation and science communication, who is your audience? Who uses the information in the reports that you produce, and what is their uptake in general?
Yeah, I feel like this question might have been asked by our director of communication, who is asking me these questions all the time, and is really working on trying to get a sense of this. We have a relatively new director of communications, and so when he came in, he was like, well, who reads these things, and who do we want to be reading them, and how do we know who is reading them? And so he and some of the we have a small communication staff, they've been really working on this in the last year or so to try to track the number of downloads and to try to get a sense of what kinds of people are reading the different kinds of documents that we are producing. And so, I mean, it depends, who's reading who's the audience, and it's a little bit variable depending on some of the products. It's really the short answer would be people with a scientific background, but who may not have the expertise in, may not know a specific biostatistical approach, but wants to understand this specific study. So it's not really for, say, like we make some, but we don't make a lot of like fact sheets that might be of interest to, say, high school students. And most of the stuff that we prepare isn't totally accessible for the media other than press releases. It's a bit more for people with a general science background, but not necessarily the specific scientific background on I don't know, on whatever method or whatever. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Looking at the chat, there are a couple of questions that came in about sort of planning for a move away from academia. And I was wondering if you all could comment on, anything that you would have done to prepare for a move away from academia, if there's anything that, would be helpful as folks navigate toward non-traditional or non-academic career paths. Any skills or things that you would suggest people sort of develop?
And I think specifically too, whether a postdoc is necessary for that, or help, or even if not necessary, helpful for that move.
Well, I would say that the value of postdoc is in learning new skills or polishing the skills that you have learned in school. So I guess a big thing for non-academic would be that you are providing a service, or you have a skill that you're offering that the company or the client or whatever the job is, they need that skill. But in academia, I guess, is a little bit different from, you're like a whole package, but I feel like outside of academia, it's just like, what can you do for us? So preparing, the main thing that I think of preparing and leaving academia is just giving yourself time. I'm sure everyone is aware it takes a really, really, really long time to get a job. And academia a lot of times is on a specific schedule. So you're going to be hired for the fall semester and you have the XYZs going on. But outside of that, the schedule is all over the place and there's new jobs every day, and you apply to a ton, and then some you never hear back from, and then some you hear one day later, and either way they're like, no, thank you. So when I think of what I did, it was changing from a CV to a resume, highlighting my skills rather than highlighting like all the students I mentored and or the classes I taught, and then giving myself time and building a thick skin.
Yeah, I would add to that. Opportunity to take some kind of project management or leadership training. I think those are pretty valued in almost any industry, and both of those are, you can take a one-day workshop on leadership, you can take a month-long certificate thing. There's all kinds of different trainings depending on your budget and your interest, but I think both of those are helpful skills in a lot of industry. And if there's opportunity while you're still a grad student to do anything, to, like, if you're working for a professor as like a lab manager, or to, say, manage some TAs or RA, something like that would give you some kind of management. I'm not that anybody really wants to go into like personnel management, but just sort of, managing junior personnel and working with other people, that those kinds of skills are helpful. And I feel like people ask about those kinds of experiences in job interviews.
I agree with Dan and Anna. I would say another thing for what Anna touched on that I think it's really useful is how you present your resume. And I feel like we are so, in academia, we're not, at least I wasn't very, I was like, my research speaks for itself, right? My degrees speak for themselves, my research, my thesis, my papers. And I feel like, and I do interview and hire a lot of people fresh from undergrad or grad school. And I feel like you need to be a little bit more, don't lie, but be a bit more like Anna said, talk about your skills, like really like say, I know how to code, I know how to use R, I know how to use SAS, I can do this and that, like focus on that. Because what for in a private firm, like what I'm looking for an environmental epidemiologist, let's say, right? And I don't expect you to know, especially if you're either fresh from a postdoc or fresh from grad school. All I want is your expertise. I don't, at this stage, I don't need you to know anything. Is a bonus. Anything else is a bonus, right? If you don't know project management, that's fine with me. You can, anything that's coachable or trainable, we can help you learn, right? But if I'm hiring a PhD epidemiologist, that's what I need. I need that technical skill, and I need to know that you are really strong in your technical skills. So I feel like I really like, don't worry too much about everything else. Just be confident in your technical skill, in your expertise as an epidemiologist, because that translates. I've seen people who have 10 papers, and then we have a conversation, and I can tell, or even sometimes they confess, like, I'm not very confident in my skill, because I feel like even after 6 years of my PhD program and 10 papers, I still don't feel, I know what I'm doing. So, which is fine, right? Because we always learn, but I feel like just be confident in that little piece that be confident in that, and know that as best as you can, because it's going to translate in how you interview, it's going to translate in your confidence level. But also don't go overboard with, I've only been in school all my life, and now, but then I see on your CV that you've managed a $3 million grant within 2 years of your master's. And I'm like, nobody's going to give you $3 million to manage. You need to either explain that better or just say, I was part of a team that, right? But yeah, a bit more confidence, but not over the board, right? But I feel like maybe coming straight from academia, we're too shy about really selling ourselves, if that makes any sense. And that cover letter, just really say in that cover letter why that job spoke to you, a bit more than just I need a job, right? Because hopefully you're gonna have that experience of finding that job posting that really speaks to you, and just your cover letter is your chance to really tell the person that's going to read it. And I read all the cover letters that land on my desk. I do read them, and you really get to know somebody's voice much better from a cover letter than from the resume that's kind of standard, right? And don't be shy about really saying how you feel in that cover letter. It's going to translate. Just be yourself at the end of the day.
Can I add to that? I was just going to say that I think people should get a cover letter, start working on a cover letter, and have that ready now. Like, even if you're 6-8 months out of finishing your PhD and you're not thinking about jobs yet, writing a really strong, clear cover letter, like maximum 2 pages long, that really tells your story, your trajectory, your strengths, your major accomplishments. This is something you're going to want to tweak and for sure make it very specific for each individual job. But having a base template, because you never know, it could be 6 months out and you're not really actively looking for jobs yet, and then your dream job comes up, or a job description that was written for you, and you want to be ready to apply for it, and you don't want to have to scramble and spend 1 week or only a few days putting this together. You want to have something that you've thought about, that your supervisors have read and commented on, so that you've kind of got, and same with your CV, keeping that up to date, so that even if you're not actively looking, if something comes along, you're ready.
This is awesome. So one of the other questions that came in was someone was interested in hearing about the differences between working for a larger versus a smaller company or organization. Could any of you comment on that if you have experience working at both?
I can speak to this a little bit. So Ramball is a very large or international company. They have thousands of employees. And working there, I was a little bit nervous about how large it was and if I would just be another small piece of a very, very large machine. But Ramball, I had a great experience there with the company. I felt like they were very communicative with their employees. There were local people that I had more of a connection with. So like my boss's boss in the US, they knew who I was and they reached out to me and we had conversations about my career. So I felt, even though it was a very large company, I felt very supported. Then when I moved to a much, much, much smaller organization, I guess I'll say when interpersonal relationships aren't going well, it's much more of a problem in a small organization because their focus is like on you. And when things become a problem, it blows up in your face real fast. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. I think big companies, they're scary, but there's no I guess risk out the door that you're not going to be valued or recognized.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a lot to. I've worked for some small places and some big places, and I mean, HI is pretty small. Our science staff, there's only about a dozen of us, so there's maybe a downside would be there's not really a lot of room for promotion. Like there's not a lot of places to go. It's a small place, and HI is a small organization. Like we don't even have an HR person. So like if there were HR problems or interpersonal problems, maybe that can get trickier. That hasn't been a problem. I'm just saying that could be an issue in a smaller place, but I don't know.
So I think we have one or two, maybe more questions that we haven't gotten to yet. We can, I think one might be fairly quick. And then I do want to ask sort of maybe an ending question, which is sort of just like a broad, big picture question of, looking back, on where you've come and where you've gone. Are there things you would do differently knowing where you've ended up? And so I'll let you mull on that for a minute. But the specific question in the chat is actually, again, sort of specific to consultants, which is, who are your clients? Who pays for environmental epi services or related type of services? I think sort of just fundamentally, like, how does this niche organization work in terms of consulting? So yeah, and maybe one or two of you could answer sort of like, who pays?
Well, Serena had already mentioned that she primarily does work with the
That's
governmental agencies. So at Ramball, our clients are primarily private industry. The work that I was doing, was funded by industry who were interested in answering research questions, and they felt that if they waited for the federal government to fund the stuff, it may take many, many, many more years than they wanted to wait for. So they were funding because they had specific questions, research questions that they wanted answered, and they wanted the answers to be like separated from their work, so to reduce the risk of looking like there was a conflict of interest, even though the work we were doing was still very scrutinized for concerns about conflict of interest, but they're trying to go to an outside party to get these research questions answered. So that's what Ramball's role was. And then they wanted it to be published in scientific journals to further have that transparency of, we did this work and it's been peer reviewed and these are the results. And then I think with hopes to go towards those reports that Serena is talking about to be part of they wanted to be part of the conversation, I guess, is the main thing that and with questions that they felt still needed to be answered. I think other groups at Ramball, they would have the funding through private industry, but they were more working on white papers or trying to interpret science for industry so that their clients would be able to understand what the regulations were, or perhaps what they should be thinking about changing based on what the scientific evidence is. And then some people also did litigation. So again, for private industry, helping as a scientific expert in a lawsuit or something like that.
I'll add really briefly that HEI, so most of the work that we fund is on the health effects of air pollution, health effects of exposure to air pollution. And so most of our funding comes from the EPA or from the automotive industry. And for reasons like Anna said, like the automotive industry, this way they can say we're supporting research into the health effects of traffic-related pollution, but they're arm's length away. They have no say in the studies that we fund or how we write up their commentaries or what we publish, anything like that. It's unbiased.
So is there anything any of you would do differently? I think Serena, you already mentioned in the chat you wouldn't do anything differently. But if there's any other, like tips, broadly speaking, or things you'd wished you'd known, ending up where you ended up, that you can share, as a sort of broad sweeping question.
I don't think I do things too differently. I've had a pretty good run so far, but two tips that I would have are almost all the jobs, maybe all the jobs that I've had have come through networking and letting people know I'm on the job market and reaching out to people and saying, I'm just finishing, like I worked as a research assistant for 2 different professors between my master's and my PhD by writing to some professors and saying like that I didn't know, but like that I knew the work they were doing, and I said like I'm graduating, I have training in GIS, I'm interested in this, let me know if you have any openings in the next 6 months, and then they did, and that was how I got working with my PhD supervisor, same kind of thing. And I wrote to HEI when I was looking for work and just said, I'm going to be looking for work in the next year. Let me know if you have any openings. And so I think it always helps. And then the other, I don't know, it's not really advice. It's just more of a, I don't know, information. But I've been on hiring committees at universities, and I've been on the hiring committees at HEI. And one thing I've really observed is so much of what comes down to the hiring decision is fit of the person, and that's something you can't prepare for. That's something you can't anticipate, and that's that's just the case. I mean, when you're applying for a faculty position, or if you're applying for a position, at HEI or anywhere, of course, there's going to be a dozen other candidates who all have the basic qualifications that are in the job posting, that have a PhD, that have a handful of publications, that have glowing letters of reference. And so if you don't get the position, it isn't because you weren't qualified or that you screwed up in the interview. It's that maybe the job description was written as such, but they were also looking for someone who, had some statistical training that wasn't mentioned there, or, also knew about microplastics and that wasn't in the job description. And it's just so much of it is, how is this person going to fit with our organization given the other employees that we have or the other people that we have in our department, more than just their skill set. And that's, as I said, it's something you can't prepare for. And so if you don't get a job, maybe it's fit, not some skill you're missing. I don't know.
I agree. That's a great point, and it's fit. And I think I wouldn't do anything differently. I loved everything I learned in school, I think. And doing my postdoc, I kind of went a little bit different. I was doing air pollution epidemiology, but then I went in doing cancer epidemiology. Try to do something different a little bit in your postdoc if you can. And I took as many classes as I could. And as a consultant, that's another thing that's what's appreciated as a consultant. It's not just your little epi slice, but the more well-rounded you are with other little things that come into play, because different projects come into play. And last year I hired a nutritional epidemiologist because we were having in the pipeline some projects that might need that kind of expertise, right? Or next year I might need an infectious epidemiologist because I'm gonna need for a certain project that we bid for. So my only I'm going to end on this: be open-minded, ask questions, be open-minded. I know it's terrifying. I know it's stressful. It's going to happen. Manifest it. Literally, like, think about it, manifest it, and be open-minded. Nothing is, just read something with an open mind and ask questions, Google, research the company, and it's going to happen. And good luck.
For me, it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer right now, but I don't have any regrets about the choices that I've made. And I think that everything that you do, you learn something in it. It's a lesson, maybe a good lesson, maybe a bad lesson, but it's, looking back and thinking, oh, I should have done something differently, would have put you in a different place today. So I try not to think about those sorts of things. But the biggest lesson that I have recently learned, well, throughout my career, is that you're always going to be put in positions that might be uncomfortable ethically. So in academia, I was put in difficult positions, and then I was also put in difficult positions out in consulting, and then in whatever. So it's not like it's different in one place versus the other, but I do think it's important to define what your line is about ethically, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and try and stay true to that in your career. So, I mean, I'm in public health. I assume a lot of people here are also in public health. So you start off with some perspective about, well, I'm trying to do something that makes a difference. So, if that's what you value and you come up to a company that's maybe doesn't meet what you find ethically appropriate, then you should, I think, to have the least amount of regrets, stay true to yourself. And if the company you work for has an issue with that, then that's their loss.
This has been great. Thank you all so much. We are at time. We will post this webinar if you want to revisit any of the answers. And thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we hope to see you on our next webinar. So thanks again.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.